In 1969, the Manson and his family slaughtered 5 adults. This slaughter was famously known as the Tate and LaBianca cases. That summer night, Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frywolski, Jay Sebring, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca were killed by the family who were Manson's followers at that time. After Manson came out of jail, he moved to California. He was released in California. And it is said that while he was in jail, he had developed a love for the Beatles and the hippie movement. He was very much into music at that time. So naturally, when he got out, he was a hippie. He decided to start his own religion and his own religious movement using apocalyptic theories and philosophies from the Beatles song Helter Skelter. He developed a racist apocalyptic theology in which it stated that blacks would at some given point in time, would overthrow the whites. Because the blacks were very oppressed, he felt that they would overthrow the whites, but it was very racist. So, with developing his love for music and the freedom that the hippie movement had at that time, it was a perfect and fertile ground for all these crimes to happen. Part of his theory was that in order for him to be safe from these wars between the blacks and the whites, they would have to go to a ranch. So he told his family that they would have to move to a ranch in order for them to be safe. Oftentimes it is said that he was called God, Satan, or Jesus Christ by his followers or the family. The family was composed of Lynette Squeaky Fromm, that was her nickname, Squeaky, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Sadie Denise Atkins, Patricia Katie Kernwile, Linda Kasabian, Sandra Good, Stevie Clem Grogan, Bruce Davis, Bobby Busoliu. A lot of the people, the members of the family, were given nicknames, and many of them came from disturbed backgrounds. So it was very easy for them to fall prey to what Manson was saying. And of course, as I keep on mentioning, this was a very confusing time for many people, as it was the 60s and it was the hippie movement. He had prophesied that in 1969, that the summer of 1969 will be the time in which will be the Armageddon or the apocalypse, and at this time would be when the blacks would take over the whites. Sure enough, the summer of 1969 came, and nothing happened. So Manson said that in order for this war to happen and for him to become Jesus Christ, they would have to teach the black people how to kill the white people and how to start the war, because black people were too stupid to do it on their own. So the family was composed of the people that I just mentioned, went and killed the 5 people that were previously mentioned, and they would write "Death, Pig," "Rise," and "Helter Skelter" on their bodies and on the walls of the victims. The first risk factor that I would like to discuss for this project is the social risk factor. Now, for the purpose of this project, this will be brief. I will combine both the social and the familial risk factors because, in his case, they're very prevalent. Some social factors include single households, parenting styles, parental monitoring, lack of attachment, quality of child's marital relationship, parental psychopathy, peer rejection and association with antisocial influences, and also gang and deviant influences. As you will see later on, we are just discussing the ingredients that were part of this horrible recipe for disaster. So the first social factor that we will discuss is the parenting styles that were used in Manson while he was growing up. Manson, his mother, Katie Maddox, was a 16-year-old prostitute when she had him. So she he lived for the first 5 years of his life with his mother, who was very permissive and neglected. When he was 5, she was convicted of a robbery with his uncle, and she was sent to jail. After this, he was taken in by an aunt and uncle of his who were strictly religious and sadistic. The uncle would abuse him. So here we see that he went from a very neglecting household to a very strict and authoritarian household, and this was a really bad change for him. He didn't really adjust to it quite well. On top of that, his uncle was abusive. The next one that we're going to discuss is the parental monitoring and the lack of attachment. As I said, his mother was sent to jail, but in 1942, by this time he was 13, he was paroled and she reclaimed her son. She was an alcoholic and brought home lovers of both sexes. Remember, she was a prostitute. Oftentimes, it is said that she would leave him with his neighbors, and weeks and days would go by and she would not come and get him. They would have to bring him, or they would have to bring him to a closer family member. It is also said that many times when she didn't have any money to buy beer, she would just trade in her son. That he did not have that close relationship with his mother, and he had a lack of attachment. And the parenting styles were very varied and changed as he was growing up. So he didn't have a stable environment. He didn't have a set environment for himself. The third social or familiar risk factor that we will talk about is peer rejection and association with antisocial peers. As I said, his uncle was very abusive. So it is said that one time, his first day of school, his uncle dressed him up like a girl so he can act like a man and would call him a sissy. Now, of course, he was very ridiculed when he went to school, and he was rejected and cast out aside. He was ostracized. His uncle believed that doing this, he would act like a man, but it was obviously the opposite result that he got. So, as a result of this, he was very lonely, he was very depressed, and he kept to himself often times. It said that he's had no friends while he went to school. Another influence was the gang and deviant influences. Because he didn't have a stable life with his family, and because his mother took him back and she was also involved in crime, it wasn't long before he was also involved in crime as well. So he was in and out of these detention centers and in jails. And while he was in and out of these detention centers and jails, he was abused and sodomized. So this influenced him because later on, this was another reason why he was sent to jail. He was found sodomizing another boy with a razor blade to his throat. He was also himself repeatedly abused. So hurt people hurt people. So he would go on hurting people. The second risk factor that we would talk about is the psychological risk factor. The risk factors that I found with his particular case is that he developed a lack of empathy, he developed a conduct disorder, and he had emotional insecurities as well as unstableness. He developed this, as you know from our previous risk factors, social risk factors, because of the way he was brought up. He didn't have a stable home, as you recall, and he was severely abused by his uncle and by his peers in the centers that he was sent to. Also, his life with his mother was very unstable, and he didn't really appreciate his mother because his mother, of course, didn't appreciate him. He developed a conduct disorder because when he lived with his mother wasn't the best influence. As you recall, she was a prostitute. She drank heavily, she did drugs, and she would oftentimes, she would sleep with both men and women. So of course, Manson, growing up, saw this and he took this lifestyle for himself. He developed this conduct disorder by stealing, fighting, running away, and these things were very prevalent throughout his life. Oftentimes he would be sent to jail or sent to a boys' home, and he would run away and come back, and many times, the reasons why he would end up in those boys' homes is because he was A, sodomizing somebody, B, fighting, or stealing a car. The final risk factor that we will be discussing is the biological risk factor. the factors that I'm gonna talk about in this project are the parental psychopathy, temperament, and antisocial behavior. Now, as I have said various times in this video, his mother wasn't really stable, and she was an alcoholic, she was a drug addict, she was also a prostitute. So she wasn't exactly right in her mind. And this affected his temperament. And temperament is kind of like character traits that a person is born with. So he might have been born a good person, but because of his child rearing and because of the way that he was raised, it was totally set aside, and he developed these traits. His temperament wasn't very stable, as you will see later on. He developed antisocial behavior because he was ostracized, abused, and he didn't have a stable relationship with the adults in his life. Also, as I mentioned in the psychological, he was oftentimes announced that he had conduct disorder, and these all were developments of the way he was treated when he was younger.